What if I told you that behind the gold-studded walls of Topkapi Palace, the daughters of sultans prayed not for love, but for death? For 600 years, the Ottoman Empire hid a ritual so cruel that even its enemies would not believe it. Every princess, born into unimaginable luxury, was forced to face one night designed to destroy her spirit forever. Tonight, we open the locked doors of a forgotten world, where obedience was worship and silence was survival. This is the untold story of the women who lived in palaces, but feared the night more than the grave. The Ottoman Empire was once the most powerful and feared empire on earth, ruling across Europe, Asia, and Africa for more than 600 years. Its name alone evoked awe and dread, its armies unstoppable, and its rulers unmatched in wealth and might. At the heart of this empire stood Istanbul, crowned by the magnificent Topkapi Palace, a world of gold, marble, and power. To outsiders, it symbolized civilization's peak, a place of poetry, opulence, and divine authority. But behind its grand gates, beyond the jeweled courtyards and echoing halls, lay another realm altogether, one of silence, secrecy, and unimaginable suffering. This hidden world was the Imperial Harem, a labyrinth of silk and shadow where over 800 women lived under the strictest control. To the world, it was paradise, a dream of beauty and luxury. In reality, it was a cage of power where every breath, every gesture, and every word could determine life or death. Inside those gilded chambers, destinies were crafted not by desire, but by decree. The harem was not just a sanctuary for the sultan's wives and concubines. It was a political weapon where alliances were forged, rivalries bloomed, and daughters were trained to serve a fate chosen for them before they could even speak. Among these royal captives was one whose story would echo through the ages. Princess Fatma Sultan, daughter of Sultan Ahmed I and his formidable wife, Kozum Sultan. Fatma Sultan was not like the others. From childhood, she was known for her brilliance, curiosity, and grace. She spoke 4 languages fluently, studied astronomy, philosophy, and art, and often left scholars in awe of her intellect. She was the pride of the palace, a rare mind in a world of ritual and obedience. But brilliance meant little in an empire built on control. Her destiny was not to learn, to rule, or to dream. It was to be given away, traded like a jewel to seal political alliances. From the day she was born, her life had already been promised. When Fatma turned 15, the empire decided her future. She was to be married to Kara Mustafa Pasha, a seasoned general twice her age and one of the Sultan's most trusted men. For him, the marriage meant honor, influence, and advancement. For her, it meant submission, silence, and the end of her freedom. Months before the ceremony, Fatma was informed that she would begin what was known as Tervai Mubarak, the sacred preparation. On paper, it was a noble tradition, a way to ready royal daughters for marriage. In truth, it was a process of psychological conditioning designed to break her spirit and shape her into a symbol of perfect obedience. Under the iron gaze of Gulnar Hatton, a stern matron of the harem, Fatma's transformation began. The lessons were relentless. From dawn to noon, she practiced 18 different forms of bowing, precise movements meant to erase individuality and replace it with submission. Every detail of her existence was rewritten. She learned how to walk with her head lowered at a precise angle, how to keep her hands below her chest at all times, how to breathe without seeming restless, how to speak only when spoken to. Even her vocabulary was restricted to 43 permitted words, phrases of gratitude, apology, and obedience. Every other word was forbidden. If she spoke out of turn, she was punished with fasting, isolation, or public humiliation. Every moment of her training chipped away at her confidence, her intelligence, and her will to resist. But the cruelest part of her education came in the form of a ritual few outside the palace would ever know: the trial of the first night. In the dimly lit chambers beneath Topkapi, the young princess was made to rehearse her wedding night in front of her instructors. Wax mannequins, sculpted by Venetian craftsmen, were placed before her, and she was forced to act out the gestures expected of her as a wife. Every flinch, every tear, every sign of hesitation was noted. If she resisted, the lesson began again. What the empire called education was nothing less than psychological torment, a systematic destruction of innocence masked as royal preparation. As the weeks passed, the training deepened. Fatma was ordered to memorize verses from religious texts, all focused on the virtues of obedience and sacrifice. The aim was simple, to convince her that her suffering was holy. Even her prayers were rewritten, filled with words not of freedom, but of submission. Twice a week, she endured another ritual of humiliation. Before the entire harem, she was made to wash, feed, and dress her father's concubines, women who share the Sultan's bed. It was a brutal reminder that even in the house of her father, she had no authority. Witnesses wrote that Fatma often cried silently during these ceremonies, her hands trembling as she combed the hair of the women her father loved more than his own daughters. A week before the wedding, Fatma was moved to the Jelenkosku, the bride's pavilion, a structure deep within the palace gardens, where no sound from the outside world could reach. Inside, everything was designed to control her mind. The walls were covered in golden tapestries depicting obedient wives from Islamic tradition, and mirrors were positioned everywhere so that she could never escape her own reflection. The practice, once known as muraqabah, a meditative Sufi exercise, had been corrupted into a tool of psychological domination. Each day, Fatma felt herself fading, her identity dissolving in the ritual of perfection. By the time her wedding day arrived, the brilliant, curious girl who had studied the stars no longer existed. In her place stood a silent, porcelain doll, obedient, fragile, and afraid. On March 15th, 1623, Istanbul erupted in celebration. The Sultan's daughter was to be wed. Streets glowed with torches, musicians played through the night, and golden coins were tossed from balconies to the cheering crowd. To the people, it was a vision of glory, a royal spectacle of joy. But for Fatma, it was a march to her doom. When night fell, she was escorted to the bride's pavilion, accompanied by attendants, priests, and guards. The structure was divided into 3 levels: purification, surrender, and consummation. Each level represented a stage of submission, a symbolic descent from royalty to servitude. On the first level, her body was washed in rosewater mixed with opium, sandalwood, and amber. The mixture was meant to calm her nerves, but left her in a dazed trance. On the second, she was dressed in a robe of white silk embroidered with gold and pearls, a garment so heavy she could barely move. Hidden clasps beneath the fabric restrained her arms and legs, and a jeweled crown, too heavy for comfort, forced her to bow her head slightly, a position of constant subordination. Finally, she was led to the 3rd level, the chamber of consummation. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting Ottoman victories in war, symbolizing the empire's belief that marriage, too, was conquest. When the chamber doors closed, the world outside vanished. The records describe what followed only in clinical language, a condition the royal physicians later named shakai, mum, meaning total collapse of the spirit. Fatma trembled uncontrollably, her eyes wide and unfocused, her breath shallow. Her voice vanished entirely. Her husband, Kara Mustafa Pasha, mistook her silence for defiance and reacted with the coldness of a soldier trained to dominate. He followed the instructions given by his mentors to assert control, to command, to break resistance. But there was nothing left to break. The girl who once loved the stars was gone, her mind retreating deep within itself to survive what her body could not. By dawn, the empire recorded a successful wedding night. In truth, it had witnessed the soul's destruction in the days that followed. Fatma's condition worsened. She refused food, spoke only when forced, and fainted whenever a man entered the room. The palace doctors labeled her state virginal melancholy, a phrase used to disguise what we now recognize as severe trauma. For months, she wandered the palace like a shadow, moving silently between rooms, her eyes hollow. She attended royal ceremonies and bore children, but those who saw her said she looked like someone who had already died. Her books gathered dust, her gardens overgrew, and her laughter, once bright and full, was never heard again. Fatma lived like this for 29 years. On the anniversary of her wedding, she died, officially from brain fever. But few in the palace believed that explanation. They whispered that her heart had finally surrendered to memories too heavy to bear. Her story might have vanished entirely if not for the secret documents uncovered centuries later, hidden deep within the Ottoman archives. Those papers revealed that Fatma was not alone. Dozens of princesses had shared her fate. Some succumbed to madness. Others took their own lives. A few simply disappeared, erased from the official records to maintain the illusion of royal perfection. The empire had perfected the art of concealment. Suffering was rewritten as virtue, and silence was glorified as grace. The chronicles praised the obedience of royal daughters without ever revealing the cost of that obedience. Yet the hidden documents tell another story, one of pain, rebellion, and the quiet defiance of women who refused to be completely broken. Some princesses feigned death to escape second marriages. Others encoded messages into embroidery, creating secret languages to communicate across the harem's walls. A few, in acts of astonishing courage, even petitioned the Sultan himself for divorce, disguising rebellion within words of humility. These stories, long buried, prove that even in the darkest systems, the human spirit finds a way to resist. The tragedy of Fatma Sultan exposes a harsh truth about absolute power, that it consumes its own before it conquers others. The world saw Ottoman princesses as symbols of beauty, wealth, and grace, but behind their jeweled crowns were chains no one could see. The golden palaces, the silks, the perfumes, all were tools to hide the cruelty beneath. The empire's strength was not built solely on conquest and politics, but on silence, the silence of women whose voices were never meant to be heard. Centuries later, when historians uncovered the truth, they found not a tale of romance and grandeur, but a history of control, fear, and broken spirits. The story of Princess Fatma is not an isolated tragedy. It is a mirror reflecting the fate of countless royal women across the world, from Europe to China, whose pain was buried beneath the grandeur of empire. And so, as we look back upon the splendor of Ottoman history, we must remember that every empire has two faces, one of power and one of the people it silenced to maintain it. History often hides its darkest truths behind gold and glory. The story of Princess Fatma is not just a tale of one girl's suffering, but a reflection of every voice silenced in the name of power. Her screams were buried beneath marble floors, her name polished into legend, and her pain rewritten as duty. Yet through the centuries, her silence still echoes, demanding to be heard. How many more stories like hers remain sealed behind palace walls? Tell me in the comments which hidden chapter of history you want uncovered next. And subscribe for more forgotten truths the world tried to erase.